My brother-in-law spent years ridiculing my infertility, labeling me broken with barren wombs, and insisting my body was wise enough to know I'd be a terrible mother. Have you ever faced such soul-crushing cruelty, year after year, that it leaves you questioning your very worth? What if the person inflicting that pain was family? And what if, when the moment finally came, you found a way to make sure they got exactly what they deserved? For years, my brother-in-law, Nathan, turned my infertility into his favorite dinner topic. Every single family meal, it was the same relentless jab. "When are you going to give your husband a real family?" he'd sneer, his eyes twinkling with a malice he tried to pass off as humor. When I'd quietly say, "We're trying," he'd bark with laughter. "Trying? Maybe you should try harder, or learn how babies are actually made." The worst part, he'd tell my husband, right there in front of me, that he could always get a second wife who wasn't broken, because, that's legal in some countries. Broken. He actually used that word. I'd just sit there, clutching my hands under the table, fighting back the tears that always seemed to prick at my eyes. His wife, my sister-in-law Beth, would try to tell him to stop, but he'd wave her off with a dismissive hand. "Oh, I'm just joking. Infertile people need to lighten up about their empty wombs." Empty wombs. Those were his exact words at Christmas dinner, I swear to God. Empty wombs. And there I was, surrounded by 3 pregnant cousins, all shifting uncomfortably, their baby bumps a stark, painful contrast to my own silent ache. Nathan, of course, had 4 kids with Beth, and he absolutely loved reminding everyone how easy it was for them. Maybe some people just weren't meant to be parents, he'd opine, usually with a dramatic sigh, because nature knows best. He'd make jokes about our extra bedrooms being wasted space, suggesting we just get more cats, since that's what childless women do. Every single comment was a deliberate, calculated strike. When my husband and I bravely started IVF, Nathan weaponized that too. At Easter, he announced to the entire family that we were wasting money on science when we should just accept being genetic dead ends. A toast at my birthday dinner for crying out loud about how, at least I'd never have to worry about stretch marks. Beth would apologize to me later. Always later, never in the moment. "Nathan's just awkward about sensitive topics," she'd whisper, and I'd nod, wishing I could believe her. But I knew, deep down, it wasn't awkwardness. It was pure, unadulterated cruelty. The absolute lowest point came after we lost a pregnancy at 8 weeks. 8 weeks. My heart was shattered. My world felt like it was crumbling. Nathan found out. And then, at a family barbecue, holding his newest baby, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "Well, at least now we know you can get pregnant. You just can't keep them." He then had the audacity to suggest that maybe your body is smart enough to know you'd be a bad mother. He said it so everyone could hear, making sure they all saw the perfect, healthy baby in his arms, the blatant contrast to my tear-filled eyes and empty heart. He even offered to give us parenting lessons for when we finally figure out how to make a baby stick. "Make them stick," he said, like it was a matter of effort. My husband, bless his heart, wanted to punch him, but I begged him not to. I just couldn't make things worse. Nathan always followed his cruel comments with some twisted rationalization. "I'm just trying to help you accept reality," he'd say, all smug. "False hope is crueler than honesty. I'm doing you a favor by preparing you for permanent childlessness." One Christmas, he even bought us a dog, saying, "Now you have something to parent that matches your abilities." He'd even trained his own kids, innocent little things, to call us the sad aunt and uncle. And they did, not understanding why it made my stomach drop every single time. But here's the thing Nathan didn't know. While he was busy mocking our inability to have kids, he was secretly charging fertility treatments to his own credit cards. Not for Beth, no. For his 23-year-old assistant. He'd been having an affair for 2 years, and she'd gotten pregnant, then miscarried. He was desperately trying to get her pregnant again because she'd threatened to leave him if he didn't give her a baby. He was charging thousands to credit cards Beth didn't even know existed. listing them as business expenses, hiding the statements at his office, even setting up a separate bank account for payments. How did I find out? Because his assistant walked into my clinic. I work as a nurse at a fertility center, and she didn't realize the connection when she made her appointment. She was crying about how her older boyfriend kept promising to leave his wife, but wanted her to have his baby first to prove she was serious. She showed me texts from Nathan, saying once she was pregnant, he'd have a reason to divorce Beth. The gut punch came when she mentioned he'd been meaner to his brother-in-law lately about fertility issues to cover his own stress about not being able to get her pregnant. She actually said he practiced his cruel comments about me, rehearsing them to make sure they sounded natural at family dinners. I couldn't violate patient privacy, not directly, but I could make sure Beth discovered things on her own. I started innocently mentioning at family dinners how common credit card theft was at medical facilities, especially fertility clinics. Beth, you really should check all your statements regularly. I'd say fertility clinics are major targets for identity theft. Beth would say Nathan handled all their finances, but I'd insist you should at least know what accounts you have for safety. I kept bringing up stories about wives discovering secret debt from hidden cards. Nathan would get visibly nervous, sweat beading on his forehead, and quickly change the subject. But the seed was planted. Then I had my husband, who was in on the plan, ask Nathan to help him look for a new rewards credit card, since Nathan was so good with finances. Nathan, ever the braggart, puffed out his chest and started detailing how he maximized points across multiple cards, accidentally mentioning having more cards than Beth knew about for better rewards distribution. My husband, playing his part perfectly, innocently repeated this to Beth. Honey, do you like the rewards from all those cards Nathan has? That did it. Beth confronted Nathan about hidden credit cards. He tried to lie, of course, but by then, she'd already started looking. She spent 3 days meticulously searching Nathan's office, finally finding the filing cabinet key taped under his desk drawer. She pulled open the bottom drawer and found folders organized by month with labels that made no sense. Until she opened them, credit card statements from accounts she'd never seen, showing charges to my fertility clinic totaling over $15,000, spread across 8 months. The patient name on the appointment summaries wasn't hers, and the dates matched perfectly with nights Nathan claimed he was working late on the Henderson account. Beth's hands shook as she laid out the papers on Nathan's desk, arranging them in order like evidence at a crime scene. She grabbed her phone and called Nathan at his office, her voice tight and controlled when his assistant put her through. Nathan answered cheerfully, asking what was up, and Beth cut him off. Nathan, she said, her voice like ice, why are you spending thousands of dollars at fertility clinics when we already have 4 kids? The silence on the other end was so long, Beth thought the call had dropped. Then Nathan stammered something about identity theft, and someone must have stolen his card information. Beth didn't miss a beat. I found statements going back months, Nathan, and appointment records with another woman's name. You need to come home right now and explain this. Nathan tried to say he was in the middle of an important meeting, but Beth interrupted, her voice gaining strength. The meeting can wait, Nathan. Our marriage can't. She hung up before he could argue. My phone rang 20 minutes later, my husband's number flashing on the screen. I answered, and he immediately asked, Do you know anything about Nathan going to fertility clinics? Beth just called me, freaking out about finding credit card statements. My stomach dropped. My heart started racing. This was it. Everything was finally coming out after months of careful planning. I told my husband honestly that I couldn't discuss my clinic's patients because of privacy laws. He went quiet for a second, then said, I understand what that means. He told me Beth was losing it at their house, tearing through Nathan's office, finding more stuff. I asked if he was going over there, and he said Beth specifically asked him to come, but wanted to wait until Nathan got home first. My hands were shaking as I held the phone. I'd spent months planting seeds, and now the whole garden was about to explode. I told my husband to keep me updated, to call if Beth needed anything, and he said he would before hanging up. I sat at my desk, staring at patient files without seeing them, because all I could think about was Nathan's face when he realized his perfect, curated life was crumbling. Nathan's car pulled into their driveway about 40 minutes later. He walked into his house to find Beth sitting at his desk, surrounded by papers organized into neat, damning piles. She looked up at him with a face he'd never seen before, completely calm, completely cold. Explain the $15,000 charged to fertility clinics over the past 8 months, Nathan. He immediately launched into his identity theft story, claiming someone must have gotten his car numbers, and he'd been meaning to report it. Beth picked up one of the papers and read the patient name out loud, her voice devoid of emotion. Is this the identity thief's name, Nathan? Or someone else's? Nathan's face went scarlet. He insisted he had no idea who that was, that Beth needed to calm down because this was obviously fraud. Beth stood up and walked to the desk drawer. She pulled out an old phone Nathan had forgotten about, the one he'd replaced 6 months ago, and simply shoved in his desk. She held it up. I charged it. I found some interesting text messages. Nathan's face went white. He lunged for the phone, but Beth pulled it back. Do you want to change your story about identity theft, Nathan, before I start reading your messages out loud? Nathan's voice got loud, angry. What are you doing? Going through my private things? You have no right to invade my privacy. Beth's voice remained calm and icy. And you, Nathan, had no right to spend $15,000 of our money on fertility treatments for your girlfriend. But here we are. Nathan started yelling, calling her crazy, accusing her of making things up and twisting everything around. But Beth, unfazed, held up the phone and started reading. The text messages laid everything out in Nathan's own words. Promises to leave Beth once his girlfriend got pregnant, because then he'd have a real reason for divorce that his family would understand. Complaints about Beth, about how their marriage had been dead for years, but he stayed for the kids. And then the texts that made my blood run cold. Messages where he told his girlfriend that being mean to his sister-in-law about her fertility problems actually helped him feel better about their own struggles getting pregnant. He actually said he practiced his cruel comments about me to make sure they sounded natural and spontaneous at family dinners. Messages where he laughed about how easy it was to make me cry and how nobody ever called him out because they all thought he was just socially awkward. Beth's voice finally broke when she read a text where Nathan told his girlfriend that his kids with Beth were mistakes he'd made when he was too young to know better. Nathan lunged for the phone again, but Beth stepped back, her eyes blazing. Get out of this house, Nathan. Right now. He switched tactics, trying to apologize, trying to explain, saying he never meant any of it, that he was just venting to someone who would listen. Beth's gaze was dead cold. You have 30 minutes to pack a bag and leave, Nathan, or I'll call the police and have you removed. Nathan started crying, pleading, saying they could work through this, go to counseling. But Beth just stared, unblinking, until he left the room. Nathan threw clothes into a suitcase, frantically calling his mom, trying to control the narrative before Beth could. He told his mother there'd been a misunderstanding, that Beth had found some old messages taken out of context and was overreacting. His mom asked what kind of messages, and Nathan said it was complicated, but nothing had actually happened. He checked into a hotel, spent the night calling family members with his twisted version of events where he was the victim of a crazy wife. He tried calling my husband and me, but we ignored him. We knew exactly what he was doing. My husband texted me, Beth wants us to come over after Nathan leaves. I told him I'd meet him there. I left work early, telling my supervisor I had a family emergency, which it was technically true, even though I'd been the one who caused it. I drove to Beth's house, stomach in knots, because I still couldn't tell her directly about being the nurse who saw her husband's girlfriend. Beth answered the door, looking absolutely destroyed. Her eyes were red and swollen, but her face was set in hard lines. She led us into Nathan's office, where papers covered every surface, organized into piles of evidence. Credit card statements, bank records, printed text messages, appointment summaries from my clinic with another woman's name on them. My husband went to Beth and hugged her, but she stood stiff and unmoving, like she might shatter if she relaxed, even slightly. Beth pulled away and looked directly at me. Is the patient name on these papers someone you know from your clinic? My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. Beth, I can't confirm or deny anyone's patient status because of privacy laws. I would never have told you about any patient, even if I wanted to. Beth nodded slowly. I understand, and I'm sorry for putting you in that position. Then, her voice cracking, she apologized for something bigger. For all the years I let Nathan mock you about your fertility struggles, for never shutting him down the way I should have. Sorry isn't enough, but I am truly, truly sorry for choosing peace over protecting you from his cruelty. I sat down on the couch, my legs suddenly weak, and then I started talking. I told Beth about every cruel comment Nathan had made that she didn't witness, the times he cornered me at family parties, asking why I was wasting money on IVF when some people just weren't meant to reproduce, the comments he made when she was in the kitchen or bathroom, about my empty wombs and broken body, the way he'd touch his own kids' heads while talking to me about my childlessness, like he was rubbing it in. My husband, his arm now around me, added his own memories of Nathan's worst moments, including the time Nathan offered to give him the number of a divorce attorney who specialized in helping men leave infertile wives. Beth cried, actual tears, listening to us describe years of abuse she'd minimized and excused. She admitted she knew Nathan's comments were cruel, but confronting him was exhausting, and he always made her feel like she was being too sensitive. She'd chosen her own comfort over protecting me, and she was ashamed. I understand, I told her. Nathan was good at making people doubt themselves. But Beth just shook her head. Understanding doesn't make it okay. I should have been better. Beth's 4 kids were upstairs, confused and scared about their father suddenly being gone. The oldest, Savannah, 16, kept texting Beth, asking what was happening. Beth had told them their father needed to stay somewhere else for a while because Mom and Dad were having problems. The younger 3, 14, 11, and 8, just knew their parents had a huge fight and Dad wasn't coming home tonight. The 11-year-old kept crying, asking if they were getting divorced. Beth couldn't answer that yet. The 8-year-old wanted to call her dad, but Beth said, not tonight, Dad needs space. But Savannah was smart. She knew something major had happened beyond a normal fight. She'd heard her parents screaming at each other, which never happened because her dad always won arguments by making her mom back down. Hearing her mom's voice stay strong and cold while her dad begged and cried, that scared her more than the yelling. Nathan showed up at the house the next afternoon, demanding to see his children. Beth refused to let him inside, telling him through the locked door that he could see the kids when they were ready and not before. Nathan's voice got loud, claiming Beth was turning the children against him and using them as weapons. Beth, her voice steady, shot back. You turned the children into weapons when you told your girlfriend they were mistakes and accidents you regretted. Nathan started pounding on the door, saying she had no right to keep his kids from him, that he'd call his lawyer. Beth said, go ahead and call, because my lawyer would be very interested in your text messages about wanting to abandon your family. Savannah heard everything from her bedroom window, which overlooked the front porch. She watched her father yelling, her mother standing firm, and something clicked in her brain about checking her dad's computer. She waited until her mom came back inside and her dad drove away before sneaking into his office. The family computer was still logged into her dad's email account because he never remembered to log out. Savannah opened his sent folder and started scrolling through months of messages to an email address she didn't recognize. Hundreds of emails between her dad and someone going back 2 years, with subject lines that made her stomach hurt. She clicked on the first one and started reading. Her father's words about being trapped in a loveless marriage, with kids he never wanted. Emails where he called her mom boring and frigid, and said his only mistake was not leaving before the 4th kid. She found explicit photos attached to emails, descriptions of hotel meetups, and promises about their future together. She screenshotted everything with shaking hands, her face wet with tears as she read her father's real feelings about their family. He called her and her siblings burdens and anchors, holding him back from happiness. He said the only good thing about having 4 kids was it made him look like a devoted family man at work. And then she found them, emails where he'd written out mean comments about my infertility and asked his girlfriend if they sounded natural enough. Her dad had turned cruelty into a performance, practicing it like lines in a play. Savannah saved over 200 screenshots to a folder on her phone before closing the browser and clearing the history. She walked downstairs where her mom was sitting with my husband and me and held out her phone. "Mom," she said, her voice small, "you need to see what else Dad's been hiding." Beth held the phone with trembling hands while the 3 of us stared at the screen. The first screenshot showed Nathan's email saying he never wanted 4 kids and calling each pregnancy a trap that Beth set for him. He'd written that Savannah was conceived right when he was about to break up with Beth, and the timing wasn't accidental. He said the 2nd and 3rd kids happened because Beth refused to use protection properly. The 4th child he called the final nail in his coffin of a life he never chose. Beth made a sound like someone had punched her in the stomach. The next screenshot showed Nathan telling Thea that his real chance at happiness was starting completely over with her and their future baby. He wrote that he'd been playing the role of devoted father for years, but it was exhausting pretending to care about school plays and soccer games. He said once Thea got pregnant, he'd finally have a reason to leave and could build the life he actually wanted. Savannah had included screenshots of Nathan describing his kids as burdens and anchors, holding him back from his real dreams. He'd told Thea that Beth got pregnant with Savannah on purpose to force him into marriage, and he'd been stuck ever since. My husband put his arm around Beth as she scrolled through dozens of messages where Nathan complained about his family and planned his escape. One email showed Nathan practicing mean comments about my infertility, asking Thea if they sounded natural enough for family dinners. He'd written out the exact words about my empty wombs and asked her opinion on delivery and timing. Thea had responded with laughing emojis and suggestions to make the comments even crueler. They'd turned my pain into entertainment. They rehearsed it like a comedy routine. Beth looked up at us, tears streaming down her face. "I need to call a family meeting. Immediately." She wanted Nathan's parents and siblings to see what kind of person he really was. My husband agreed and offered to help her set it up. Beth grabbed her phone and started making calls while Savannah sat on the couch, staring at nothing, looking like she'd aged 10 years in the past hour. 3 days later, we all gathered at Nathan's parents' house. Beth had asked everyone to come without telling Nathan. His parents sat on the couch, looking worried, while his 2 younger brothers and their wives took chairs around the room. My husband and I sat together near Beth, who had a folder of printed evidence in her lap. Nathan's mother kept asking what this was about, if the kids were okay. Beth waited until everyone settled down. I'd discovered Nathan was having an affair with his assistant and spending thousands on fertility treatments for her. Nathan's mother gasped. There must be some mistake. Nathan loves his family. His father asked if Beth was sure, suggesting maybe she misunderstood something innocent. Beth opened the folder and started passing around printed screenshots of Nathan's emails and text messages. The room went silent as people read Nathan's words about never wanting his children, calling his marriage a trap. Nathan's younger brother, eyes wide, asked if this was really from Nathan's email account. Beth confirmed she'd verified everything and had even more evidence at home. Nathan's mother started crying again. Marriages go through rough patches. You should try counseling before making any big decisions. People say things they don't mean when they're stressed. She said Nathan was probably just venting. Beth let her finish before dropping the real bomb. Nathan had been practicing his cruel comments about my infertility to cover his stress about getting his girlfriend pregnant. She explained how Nathan would write out mean things to say to me and rehearse them with Thea to make sure they sounded natural at family dinners. The room went completely silent. Nathan's mother stopped crying and stared at Beth, her face blank. His father's face turned red. Everyone looked at me, sitting there. As the truth sank in, Nathan had turned my pain into a calculated performance. My hand started shaking, and my husband grabbed one of them, squeezing it tightly. I'd never spoken up at family gatherings before. I didn't want to cause drama, to make things awkward. But sitting there with everyone finally understanding what Nathan had done, something broke open inside me. My voice came out quiet and shaky at first. I need you all to know, I said, what the past few years have been like for me. I told them about crying in my car after Christmas dinner, when Nathan made the empty wombs comment in front of my pregnant cousins. I described driving home from Easter, having a panic attack because Nathan had announced to everyone that we were genetic dead and wasting money on science. My husband squeezed my hand tighter while I talked about dreading every family event, feeling sick to my stomach before walking into gatherings. I explained how the miscarriage comments still woke me up at night sometimes, how I'd started avoiding family dinners altogether by claiming work emergencies. Nathan's mother was crying again, but this time she was looking at me instead of defending her son. I told them about the birthday toast, where Nathan joked about me never having to worry about stretch marks, and how I'd locked myself in the bathroom afterward to sob quietly so nobody would hear. My voice got stronger as I described years of comments about my broken body, how Nathan would corner me at gatherings to offer parenting advice for when we figured out how to make babies stick. Your silence, I said, my voice thick with emotion. It hurt almost as much as Nathan's words, because it made me feel like maybe I was overreacting or being too sensitive. My husband finally spoke up, his voice shaking with barely contained fury. I've wanted to punch Nathan at every family gathering for years, but she begged me not to make things worse. He described holding me while I cried after events, listening to me question whether I was really as broken and worthless as Nathan said. The room felt heavy with guilt and regret. Nobody could look me in the eye. Nathan's father cleared his throat. I noticed Nathan making uncomfortable comments, he admitted, but I assumed it was just awkward humor. I thought if you were truly hurt, you would speak up or leave the room instead of sitting there quietly. Nathan's younger brother confessed he'd felt weird about some of the things Nathan said, but didn't want to start family drama by calling him out. His wife added that she'd mentioned to her husband that Nathan was being mean, but they'd decided it wasn't their business. One by one, family members admitted they'd felt uncomfortable, but chosen peace over protecting me. Nathan's mother said she'd talked to Nathan privately a few times about being more sensitive, but he always insisted he was just joking, and I needed to lighten up. She believed him because she couldn't imagine her son being deliberately cruel. The collective guilt in that living room was thick enough to cut. They'd all watched Nathan torment me for years and done nothing, because speaking up felt harder than staying silent. Nathan's father said he was ashamed that he'd prioritized avoiding conflict over protecting me from his son's cruelty. He admitted that parents want to believe the best about their children, and he'd convinced himself Nathan was just socially awkward instead of seeing the truth. Nathan's mother kept saying she should have known better and protected me like a daughter instead of making excuses for Nathan's behavior. Nathan's brothers both apologized for not standing up to him, saying they believed his claim that he was just being honest about a difficult topic. The family's perception of Nathan was shifting in real time, from slightly inappropriate to deliberately calculating and cruel. Nathan's mother came over and knelt in front of my chair, tears streaming down her face. She took both my hands. "I am so sorry," she whispered, "for failing to protect you all these years. I should have shut Nathan down the first time he made a cruel comment, instead of privately asking him to be nicer." She admitted she'd enabled his behavior by treating it like an awkward personality quirk, instead of the deliberate emotional abuse it actually was. Nathan's siblings gathered around, and each apologized directly to me for their silence and inaction. His younger brother said, "Learning that Nathan rehearsed his comments changed everything. It proved the cruelty was strategic and planned." They'd all believed Nathan's story about being socially awkward. Finding out he'd practiced his meanest comments with his girlfriend destroyed that excuse completely. Nathan's sister-in-law said she'd never liked how Nathan talked to me, but convinced herself it wasn't her place to interfere. She realized now that being family meant protecting each other, not avoiding uncomfortable conversations. The family's view of Nathan shifted completely, from devoted father and slightly inappropriate joker to manipulative liar who'd tormented a vulnerable family member for years while planning to abandon his own children. Nathan's father said he didn't recognize the man in those emails as his son. Nathan's mother said the person who would rehearse cruelty and mock someone's deepest pain wasn't someone she wanted in her life anymore. Beth stood up. "I'm filing for divorce, and I'm seeking full custody of the children." She'd already contacted an attorney who specialized in financial deception and emotional manipulation. She'd frozen their joint bank accounts that morning and started documenting everything for court. Nathan's mother immediately said she and her husband would help Beth financially with legal costs and anything else the kids needed. Nathan's father agreed without hesitation. "We're choosing Beth and our grandchildren over Nathan. Our son has made his choices, and now he has to live with the consequences." Beth thanked them, fresh tears in her eyes. "I'm scared about doing this alone, but I know I can't stay married to someone who's betrayed their family so completely." Nathan's brothers both offered to help Beth move, promising their families would support her and the kids however they could. The family was closing ranks around Beth and the children, cutting Nathan out. His mother said she needed time before she could face Nathan. "Right now, I'm too angry and disappointed to speak to him." His father said Nathan wasn't welcome in their home until he took full responsibility and showed real remorse instead of excuses. The meeting that started with Nathan's mother defending him ended with his entire family choosing his victims over him. And then the front door opened. Nathan walked in, saying he'd gotten a weird text from his mother about a family meeting. He stopped when he saw everyone gathered in the living room, staring at him. His face went pale as he looked at Beth holding the folder, and then at me sitting next to my husband. Nathan asked what was going on, and his mother told him to sit down. Nathan stayed standing. "Whatever Beth told you isn't the whole story." His father cut him off. "We've seen the emails and text messages, Nathan. Lying won't help." Nathan tried to claim the affair meant nothing, that he was going through a midlife crisis. His voice got defensive. Lots of men my age make mistakes when they feel trapped and unappreciated. Nathan's younger brother stood up. "What about the emails where you called your own children accidents and burdens, Nathan?" Nathan's face flushed red. "People say things they don't mean when they're venting to someone they're sleeping with. Thea brought out my worst side. I never really felt that way about my kids." Beth's voice was quiet but steady. "Did you feel that way about me trapping you with pregnancies, Nathan?" Nathan stammered. "Marriages are complicated. Sometimes people feel stuck, even when they love their families." His excuses sounded hollow and desperate as family members stared at him with disgust. Nathan's sister-in-law brought up the rehearsed comments about my infertility, and Nathan's face went even redder. He tried to laugh it off. I was just trying to lighten the mood at tense family dinners. I didn't realize she was so sensitive. My husband stood up fast, and Nathan took a step back. Nathan looked at me, his eyes wide. I want to apologize. I've been projecting my own fertility struggles onto you. I was dealing with stress about Thea's miscarriage, struggling to get her pregnant again. His voice got pleading. I never meant to hurt you so badly. I was just dealing with my own pain in an unhealthy way. I stayed sitting. Your pain, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, doesn't excuse years of calculated cruelty. I looked him dead in the eye. Real remorse would have come before getting caught, Nathan, not after your entire life fell apart. Practicing mean comments with your girlfriend proves it wasn't about stress or projection. It was about deliberately hurting someone you knew was vulnerable. Nathan tried to interrupt, but I kept talking. You made family gatherings into performances where my infertility was your punchline. You turned the worst experience of my life into entertainment and rehearsed it like comedy material. Nathan's face crumpled, and he mumbled apologies. Sorry isn't enough, I told him. And it's too late. The damage is already done. Nothing you say now will erase years of crying in parking lots and dreading holidays. My husband stepped closer to Nathan. I've wanted to say this for years. You're a coward, Nathan. You punch down at someone vulnerable instead of dealing with your own problems like an adult. His voice shook with anger. He described all the times he'd held me while I cried, questioned my worth because of Nathan's comments. I watched you systematically destroy her confidence and self-esteem while everyone sat there uncomfortable but silent. He listed specific cruel things Nathan had said, including the miscarriage comment and the joke about my body being smart enough to know I'd be a bad mother. He told Nathan that claiming stress or projection was just another manipulation, because truly stressed people don't rehearse their cruelty with their affair partners. Nathan stood there, utterly broken, as my husband laid out every bit of damage he'd caused. Nathan's father told him to leave and not come back until he was ready to take real responsibility. Nathan looked around the room at his family, all united against him, and walked out without another word. The door closed behind him, and nobody moved to follow. Beth's best friend, Maddie, showed up an hour later. Beth had called her from the bathroom, needing someone outside the family to talk to. Maddie walked into the living room and hugged Beth hard. She told Beth she was relieved the truth finally came out because watching Nathan treat people badly while everyone pretended it was normal had been driving her crazy for years. She encouraged Beth to be absolutely ruthless in the divorce, to protect herself and the kids without any guilt. Maddie said Nathan had shown his true character and deserved every consequence coming his way. She told Beth that being kind or accommodating would just give Nathan opportunities to manipulate the situation more. Maddie, practical and fierce, pulled out her phone and started making notes about documentation Beth needed to gather and questions to ask her attorney. Beth cried with gratitude for having a friend who didn't tell her to forgive or try counseling. Maddie simply said, "Some betrayals are too big to forgive, and this is definitely one of them." 2 days after Nathan's humiliation, Beth's phone rang. The credit card company's fraud department wanted to discuss suspicious dispute. Claims filed by Nathan. Beth had to sit down at the kitchen table. The investigator explained that Nathan claimed someone stole his cards and made unauthorized charges at a fertility clinic. Beth found herself explaining that yes, her husband really did make those charges, but no, she hadn't authorized them. And yes, they were still married when he opened the accounts. The investigator asked increasingly complicated questions about marital debt and whether Beth benefited from any purchases. Beth realized the financial mess was way worse than just hidden credit cards. Nathan's fraud claims meant the credit companies might try to make Beth responsible for the debt since they were married when he charged everything. She hung up feeling sick and immediately called her attorney. Kenneth, Beth's lawyer, told her to come to his office that afternoon with every financial document she could find. Beth spent hours going through Nathan's desk and filing cabinets, finding statements and receipts she'd never seen before. She made copies of everything and drove to Kenneth's office with 3 folders full of paper. Kenneth spread everything across his conference table, making notes. He suggested Beth hire a financial advisor to help untangle the mess. Beth left feeling overwhelmed, but at least she had a plan. The financial advisor spent an hour going through everything Beth collected. When she finally looked up, her face was serious. She'd found evidence of 3 additional credit cards Beth didn't know existed, all opened in Nathan's name only, but during their marriage. The total debt across all the cards exceeded $30,000. Beth felt dizzy looking at the spreadsheet. There were purchases at jewelry stores for items Beth never received, hotel charges for weekend trips Beth never took, restaurant bills from places Beth had never heard of. Nathan had been funding an entire second life with Thea, while telling Beth they needed to budget carefully and skip family vacations because money was tight. Beth remembered all the times Nathan said they couldn't afford things for the kids or the house, and a cold rage burned through her chest. Someone sent an anonymous email to Nathan's employer 3 days later. It detailed Nathan's affair with his assistant Thea and suggested the company investigate whether any workplace resources or time had been used inappropriately. Nathan's boss called him into a meeting that afternoon and informed him he was placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. Nathan came home to his hotel room that evening and called Beth, screaming about how she'd ruined his career. Beth told him she had no idea what he was talking about and hung up. Nathan sent her 12 text messages accusing her of contacting his work, but Beth honestly hadn't done it. She wondered if someone else in the family had, but nobody admitted to anything. My phone at the clinic rang during my lunch break the following week. My receptionist told me Thea Morgan was on the line, asking to speak with me. I took the call in a private office. Thea's voice sounded small and embarrassed. She asked about transferring her care to a different clinic, saying the situation had become too uncomfortable now that everything was public. I pulled up her file and processed the transfer request without commenting on anything personal. Thea apologized awkwardly for not realizing I was Nathan's sister-in-law when she first came to the clinic. I told her the transfer would be complete within 2 business days and wished her well with her future treatment. She thanked me quietly and hung up. I sat there for a minute, feeling strange about the whole conversation, then went back to my desk and finished my sandwich. Beth met with Kenneth again the next week. He spread out copies of all the financial records and the evidence of Nathan's affair. He told Beth the combination of financial deception and an affair with a subordinate strengthened her position significantly. Kenneth recommended documenting absolutely everything and preparing for Nathan to fight dirty, since he was losing control of the narrative. Nathan's type, he said, often gets desperate and tries to manipulate situations when they feel cornered. Beth asked how long the divorce might take. Probably 6 months to a year, Kenneth said, depending on how much Nathan fights. Beth steeled herself for a long legal battle, but felt supported, knowing her family and friends were on her side. Nathan tried calling Savannah every day that week, but she refused to answer. He texted asking to meet for coffee or lunch, saying he needed to explain things to her. Savannah blocked his number after the 5th text. Nathan even showed up at the house when he knew Beth would be at work, hoping to catch Savannah after school. Savannah saw his car in the driveway and called her mom, then stayed at a friend's house until Beth got home. The younger 3 kids didn't understand why their big sister was so mad at Dad. Beth tried to explain, in age-appropriate terms, that Dad had hurt people's feelings, and Savannah needed time. Nathan, of course, blamed Beth for turning Savannah against him, sending Beth long emails about parental alienation and how she was damaging the kids. He simply refused to acknowledge that Savannah had read his own words, calling his children accidents and burdens. I called a therapist the following Monday and made an appointment for later that week. Her name was Annabelle Thornton, and her office was in a quiet building near the hospital. When Annabelle called me back, she had kind eyes and a calm voice that made me feel less nervous. I explained the whole situation with Nathan, the years of cruel comments, discovering Thea at my clinic, and how I'd helped Beth find out the truth without directly violating patient privacy. I told Annabelle I felt vindicated, but also guilty about Beth and the kids suffering. Annabelle listened without interrupting, and then said something that made me cry. She told me that protecting myself by planting seeds for Beth to discover the truth wasn't wrong or manipulative. She said I'd been systematically abused by Nathan for years, and I had every right to stop that abuse however I could, within ethical boundaries. I left that first session feeling lighter than I had in weeks. My supervisor, Edwin, called me into his office the next day. My stomach dropped. He closed the door. I need to discuss the situation to make sure everything had been handled properly regarding patient confidentiality and professional boundaries. I explained exactly what I'd done and what I hadn't done, walking him through how I never directly revealed Thea was a patient or shared any of her medical information. I told him about suggesting Beth check credit card statements and having my husband ask Nathan about rewards cards, but never mentioning Thea's name or treatment details. Edwin listened carefully. Then he told me he'd reviewed everything with the clinic's legal team. He said I'd handled an incredibly difficult personal situation ethically and maintained proper boundaries. Edwin actually commended my restraint, given how much Nathan had hurt me over the years. I left his office feeling validated and relieved that my job was secure. Nathan's mother called Beth in early November, asking about Thanksgiving plans. Beth said she hadn't thought about it much, given everything happening with the divorce. Nathan's mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said she and Nathan's father had decided to host Thanksgiving dinner, and they wanted Beth and the grandchildren to come. Nathan won't be invited, she said. Beth asked if they were sure about excluding their own son from the holiday, and Nathan's mother said they'd thought about it carefully. Nathan's actions have consequences, she said, and one of those consequences is not being welcome at family gatherings until he takes real responsibility for what he's done. Nathan's parents called their other children and explained the decision, and everyone agreed to come to Thanksgiving without Nathan. Nathan found out when his mother called to tell him directly that he wasn't invited. He spent Thanksgiving alone in his small apartment, eating takeout Chinese food while his parents, siblings, wife, and children celebrated without him. Beth got a call from Kenneth 3 days after Thanksgiving with news about Nathan's retirement accounts. Kenneth had discovered through financial disclosure that Nathan was entitled to a substantial pension from his years at the company, plus retirement accounts worth over $200,000. Nathan's initial divorce filing had conveniently left out details about these accounts. Kenneth told Beth she was entitled to half of everything accumulated during the marriage, which was most of it, since Nathan had only worked at the company for 2 years before they got married. Kenneth said he was pushing for an even larger settlement, given the financial deception and emotional harm Nathan had caused. Nathan's attorney, Fletcher, tried arguing that Nathan had made mistakes, but deserved fair treatment in the division of assets. Kenneth sent Fletcher copies of all the hidden credit card statements and evidence of the affair, making it clear they had extensive documentation of Nathan's deception. Fletcher called Kenneth back 2 hours later, saying they needed to schedule mediation to discuss settlement terms. The first mediation session happened 2 weeks after Kenneth sent the initial settlement proposal. Beth met him in the lobby, dressed in a navy dress, carrying a folder of documents. Nathan arrived 10 minutes late with his attorney, looking tired and wearing a wrinkled shirt. The mediator, Mrs. Reeves, explained the ground rules. Nathan immediately started talking. "I want to apologize for everything. I never meant to hurt anyone. Beth is a wonderful mother, and I hope we can work something out that's fair to everyone." Mrs. Reeves asked him to wait until they went through the financial disclosure documents. Kenneth laid out copies of the credit card statements, bank records, and text message printouts across the table. Nathan's face went red as Fletcher reviewed the evidence and made notes on a legal pad. Beth sat quietly, her hands folded, not looking at Nathan directly. When Mrs. Reeves asked Nathan to explain the fertility clinic charges, he claimed he was confused and under a lot of stress at work. He said Thea had manipulated him and threatened to tell Beth if he didn't help pay for treatments. Kenneth pointed out that the text messages showed Nathan initiating contact and promising to leave Beth. Nathan switched tactics. "I'm the victim of a vindictive wife who's poisoning his children against him." He claimed Beth had always been controlling about money, and he felt trapped in the marriage. Fletcher put his hand on Nathan's arm, suggesting they take a break, but Nathan kept talking. "My family has turned against me because Beth is spreading lies and making me look worse than I am." Mrs. Reeves asked Beth if she wanted to respond, and Beth just shook her head. Kenneth spoke instead, walking through each piece of evidence and asking Nathan to confirm or deny specific facts. Nathan admitted to the affair, but claimed it only lasted 6 months, not 2 years. Fletcher corrected him quietly after checking the message timestamps. Nathan said he never planned to leave Beth, and that Thea misunderstood his intentions. Kenneth showed him a text where Nathan explicitly discussed divorce timelines and custody arrangements. Nathan's voice got louder. "You're twisting everything to make me look bad. I made one mistake, and everyone's acting like I'm some kind of monster." Beth finally spoke. "You made hundreds of choices over 2 years to lie and cheat and spend our money, Nathan." He tried to reach across the table toward her, but Fletcher stopped him. The session ended with no agreement, and another mediation scheduled for 3 weeks later. Nathan's company called him into a meeting with Human Resources 4 days after the first mediation session. 2 HR representatives and his department director sat across from him. They'd completed their investigation into his relationship with Thea and reviewed company policies about supervisor relationships with subordinates. Nathan tried to explain that nothing inappropriate happened at work and that his personal life shouldn't matter to the company. The HR director said they'd interviewed 5 coworkers who witnessed Nathan giving Thea preferential treatment, including better assignments and flexible scheduling. They'd also found emails Nathan sent from his work account making personal plans with Thea during business hours. Nathan claimed those emails were taken out of context. The director showed him the company ethics policy he'd signed when he was promoted, specifically the section about relationships with direct reports. Nathan argued that Thea wasn't directly reporting to him anymore, but HR explained that the relationship started when she was his direct report and he'd failed to disclose it as required. They also found evidence he'd approved her transfer to avoid disclosure, rather than end the inappropriate relationship. Nathan asked what this meant for his employment. The director said they were terminating him effective immediately for ethics violations. Nathan demanded to speak to someone higher up, but they told him the decision was final. Security escorted him to his office to collect personal items. Nathan called Fletcher from his car, panicking about losing his salary during the divorce. Fletcher said it would complicate things, but they'd figure it out. Nathan drove to his apartment, his life as he knew it gone. Beth took Savannah to meet Valentina, a therapist, for the first time. Savannah sat on the couch with her arms crossed, not making eye contact. Valentina introduced herself, explaining that therapy was a safe space. Savannah said she didn't want to be there, that talking wouldn't change anything. Beth squeezed her daughter's hand, telling her she'd be in the waiting room. After 5 minutes of silence, Savannah suddenly started crying. "I hate my father for what he wrote about us," she choked out. She pulled up the screenshots on her phone, showing Valentina the messages calling her and her siblings accidents. Valentina listened, validating that reading those words must have been incredibly painful. Savannah said she also hated her mother for not protecting them from finding out such horrible things. You should have hidden the evidence better, or warned us before we went searching. Valentina asked what Savannah wished had happened differently. Savannah said she wished she still believed her father loved them. Everything feels like a lie now, she wept, and I don't know what's real anymore. The session lasted 50 minutes. Savannah was exhausted. Beth drove her home, and they didn't talk much. Savannah went to her room and didn't come out for dinner. Beth texted Valentina, asking if this was normal. Valentina replied that the first session was often the hardest. She said Savannah needed time to process, and that healing wasn't a straight line. Beth scheduled another appointment for the following week. I sat in Annabelle's office on a rainy Tuesday morning, staring at the tissue box. We'd been talking about Nathan for weeks, and I was tired of giving him so much space in my head. Annabelle asked me what I thought Nathan was really doing when he mocked my infertility. He was being cruel, I said, trying to hurt me. Annabelle nodded, asking me to think deeper about what Nathan might have been feeling about himself. I snapped. I don't care what he was feeling. It doesn't excuse his behavior. Annabelle agreed, but gently suggested his motivation might help me stop carrying his words as truth. She asked me to imagine Nathan sitting with his own infertility struggles and secrets, watching me try IVF openly while he hid his failures. And then it hit me. He was probably scared, ashamed about not being able to get Thea pregnant. Annabelle said Nathan built himself up by tearing me down because he couldn't face his own inadequacy. She asked if I truly believed my body was broken, or if that was just Nathan's projection of his own fears. I admitted I'd internalized his words so deeply that I sometimes did believe I was broken. Annabelle asked me to list 3 things I knew were true about myself that had nothing to do with fertility. I'm a good nurse, I said, a loyal friend, and someone who keeps trying despite obstacles. She asked if those things sounded like a broken person, and I shook my head. Annabelle said Nathan's cruelty revealed everything about his character and nothing about my worth. She asked me to notice when I started believing his words again and to challenge those thoughts with evidence. I left her office feeling lighter than I had in months, like I'd been carrying Nathan's shame along with my own grief and could finally put his part down. My husband and I sat at our kitchen table one Sunday morning, coffee growing cold, fertility clinic paperwork spread between us. We'd been doing treatments for 3 years, and the stress was affecting everything. He said he was worried about me, about us, that we'd stopped doing things we enjoyed because everything revolved around cycles and appointments. I admitted I was exhausted and that the family drama with Nathan had made me realize how much mental energy the treatments consumed. He asked if I wanted to stop trying. I said I didn't know what I wanted anymore. We talked about what our life could look like without children and whether we'd regret not trying every possible option. He said he married me because he loved me, not because he needed me to give him children. I cried. I said I felt like I was failing him, even though he never made me feel that way. He held my hand and suggested we take a break for a few months to focus on our relationship and mental health. We could travel, spend time with friends, remember what we enjoyed about life before infertility took over. I agreed, feeling relieved and guilty at the same time. We talked about adoption as a possibility we'd barely explored because we'd been so focused on biological children. He said he was open to it if we decided that's what we wanted. We also discussed the possibility of accepting a child-free life and finding meaning in other ways. I called the clinic the next day and told them we were pausing treatment indefinitely. The nurse was understanding. My husband and I booked a weekend trip to the mountains, something we hadn't done in years. Beth called Kenneth in a panic. She'd received a letter from a mortgage company about a loan application. Kenneth told her to bring it to his office immediately. Nathan had applied for a home equity loan for $50,000 2 weeks earlier, listing himself as the sole owner. The application was denied because the title search showed Beth as co-owner, and she hadn't signed the documents. Kenneth explained that Nathan trying to borrow against their house without her knowledge was a serious violation. He asked if Beth had any idea what Nathan needed $50,000 for, and Beth said, "Probably the credit card debt." Kenneth said they needed to file an emergency motion to prevent Nathan from accessing any marital assets. He drafted the motion that afternoon and filed it with the court the next morning. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. Kenneth called Fletcher and told him what Nathan had tried to do. Fletcher sounded genuinely surprised. "I told Nathan not to touch any assets during the divorce," he said. Kenneth replied, "The judge isn't going to be happy about this." At the hearing, Nathan claimed he didn't understand he needed Beth's permission. The judge asked him directly if he'd discussed the loan with Beth or his attorney. Nathan admitted he hadn't. The judge said Nathan's behavior showed a pattern of financial deception and ordered all bank accounts, retirement funds, and property frozen until the divorce was finalized. Nathan couldn't access anything without court approval or Beth's written consent. Kenneth smiled slightly as they left the courtroom. Beth felt protected for the first time in months. Nathan's parents invited him to dinner at their house. Nathan assumed they wanted to check on him, offer support. He arrived to find just his parents, no siblings or extended family. His mother served pot roast. The atmosphere was tense. Nathan started complaining about Beth and the divorce, how unfair everything was. His father interrupted. "We need to have a serious conversation, Nathan." His mother said they'd been talking a lot about everything that happened, and they were ashamed of him. Nathan looked shocked. "You're my parents. You should be on my side." His father said, "Being your parents means telling you the truth, even when it's hard." He said Nathan's treatment of me over the years was cruel and calculated, not the awkward humor Nathan claimed. Nathan tried to defend himself, but his mother said they'd heard the full story from multiple people. His father said he was disappointed in the man Nathan had become. Nathan said he made mistakes, but everyone's acting like I'm evil. His mother countered, "Making mistakes means forgetting to call or being late, not systematically mocking someone's pain for years." She said Nathan needed to take full responsibility and stop playing victim. Nathan's father said the affair and financial lies were bad enough, but the cruelty to me was what truly revealed Nathan's character. He said Nathan built himself up by tearing down someone vulnerable, and that was cowardly. Nathan stood up from the table. "My own parents have turned against me, just like everyone else." His father said, "We haven't turned against you, Nathan. We're trying to help you see the truth." Nathan grabbed his coat and walked out, slamming the door behind him. His mother cried, and his father put his arm around her. They didn't call Nathan to apologize. I stopped at a coffee shop near the clinic, ordering a latte. Thea walked in 5 minutes later and froze when she saw me. I nodded at her. She hesitated, then came to my table. "Can I sit down for a minute?" she asked. I said okay. Thea looked different, older somehow, tired. She said she wanted to apologize for everything, even though she knew it probably didn't matter. I asked what she was apologizing for. "For not realizing you were Nathan's sister-in-law," she said. "For being part of hurting his family." I told her she didn't owe me an apology, that Nathan was the one who lied to both of us. Thea said Nathan told her so many lies about his marriage and his family. "I thought he was separated," she said, "and that Beth knew about me." I asked if she really believed that, and Thea admitted she'd wanted to believe it. She said Nathan told her I was his brother's wife who was obsessed with getting pregnant and made everyone uncomfortable. She said she had no idea Nathan was mocking me at family dinners or that his comments were rehearsed. I asked how she found out the truth, and Thea said Beth's attorney contacted her for a deposition. Reading all the evidence, seeing the full timeline, it made me realize how much Nathan had manipulated me. Thea said she ended things with Nathan after the deposition and was moving to another city for a fresh start. We sat in awkward silence for a minute before Thea said, "I hope you get everything you wanted someday." I thanked her and she left. I finished my latte, feeling strange about the interaction but glad it happened. Kenneth called Beth 6 weeks after the emergency motion hearing. Nathan was refusing to agree to Beth's custody terms, wanting equal time with the children instead of the supervised visitation Beth proposed. He also wouldn't accept giving Beth 70% of the marital assets. Kenneth said Fletcher had sent a counter-proposal offering 50/50 custody and a 60/40 asset split. Beth said Savannah didn't want to see Nathan at all, and the younger kids needed stability. Kenneth agreed. "We have strong evidence to support your position." He asked if Beth was prepared to go to trial if Nathan wouldn't settle. Beth said yes without hesitation. Kenneth said trials were expensive and emotionally draining, but he was confident they'd win. Nathan's financial deception, the affair with a subordinate, and his cruelty documented in text messages all favor Beth. Fletcher called Kenneth later that day and said Nathan was insisting on fighting. Kenneth asked if Fletcher had explained how unlikely Nathan was to win, and Fletcher admitted off the record that he thought Nathan was making a mistake. Kenneth said, "We'll see him in court." Beth started preparing for trial, gathering more documentation, making lists of witnesses. The trial date was set for 3 months out. I watched Beth handle everything with such strength and clarity, never backing down or accepting less than she deserved. She'd transformed from someone who apologized for Nathan's behavior into someone who demanded accountability. I started thinking about other areas of my life where I'd been too passive or accommodating. My husband's aunt had made comments about us being selfish for not having kids yet, saying we were missing out on real fulfillment. I'd always smiled and changed the subject. At the next family dinner, when she started again, I told her directly, "My fertility is not up for discussion, and I'd appreciate your respecting that boundary." She looked surprised but apologized. My husband squeezed my hand under the table, a proud smile on his face. A coworker had been making jokes about me being the only one in our department without kids, calling me the free one who could always cover shifts. I went to my supervisor and explained the comments made me uncomfortable, given my infertility struggles. The supervisor talked to the coworker, and the joke stopped. I started speaking up in meetings instead of waiting to be called on. I stopped apologizing for things that weren't my fault. My husband noticed the change. "I'm proud of you," he said. "You seem more confident and comfortable in your own skin." I told him watching Beth stand up for herself made me realize I'd been shrinking myself to avoid conflict. He said I never had to shrink around him. I felt like I was becoming a different version of myself, one who didn't accept poor treatment just to keep the peace. 2 weeks after Kenneth warned Nathan about going to trial, Fletcher called back with a different tone. Nathan was ready to settle. Kenneth reviewed the proposed terms with Beth at his office. Nathan agreed to primary custody going to Beth, with him having supervised visits every other weekend. He accepted the 70% asset split, keeping only his retirement account and his car, while Beth got the house, the savings, and most of their investments. The child support payments were substantial, calculated based on his previous salary before losing his job. He had to complete 6 months of therapy and parenting classes before the supervised visits could become unsupervised. Beth signed the papers without hesitation. Kenneth filed everything with the court, and the judge approved the settlement 3 days later. The divorce was finalized exactly 6 months after Beth found those credit card statements in Nathan's office. Savannah agreed to try family therapy with Nathan after Valentina suggested it might help her process everything. The first session was tense, with Savannah sitting as far from Nathan as possible. Nathan tried to apologize, but Savannah cut him off. I don't want to hear, sorry. I want to understand why you wrote those things about us being accidents. Nathan looked at the floor and admitted he'd been overwhelmed and resentful about having 4 kids so young. But that didn't mean he didn't love them. Savannah asked if he loved them, or just felt obligated to them. Nathan didn't have a good answer. Valentina helped them work through small conversations over the next few months, and slowly Savannah started responding to Nathan's texts. She agreed to see him for coffee, then for short visits at a park. The relationship was fragile, and Savannah told Beth she wasn't sure she'd ever fully trust him again, but she was willing to try. The younger 3 kids adjusted to the custody schedule more easily, excited to have their own rooms in Beth's new apartment, treating visits with Nathan like special outings. Beth created routines and stability, making sure homework got done and bedtime stayed consistent. The kids started seeming lighter, laughing more, fighting with each other in normal sibling ways instead of the tense silence that had filled the house before. Nathan's parents invited everyone to dinner at their house. Beth arrived with all 4 kids, and I came with my husband. Nathan's siblings were there with their families. Nathan wasn't invited, and everyone knew it. His mother hugged Beth extra long at the door. Once we were all seated around the dinner table, Nathan's father stood up. I need to say something. He looked directly at me. I apologized for every time I stayed silent when Nathan made cruel comments. I convinced myself it wasn't my place to interfere, but I was wrong. Nathan's mother added that she was ashamed she'd prioritized keeping peace over protecting me. She promised that nobody would ever be allowed to make mean comments at family gatherings again, and if anyone tried, they'd be asked to leave. Nathan's sister said she was sorry, too, admitting she'd thought Nathan was just socially awkward, and didn't realize how calculated his cruelty was. The apologies felt genuine and necessary. Dinner was different from any family meal I could remember. People asked me about my work at the clinic and actually listened to my answers. Beth talked about her new job promotion, and everyone celebrated with her. The kids ran around playing tag, their laughter filling the house. Nobody made jokes at anyone else's expense. Nobody dominated the conversation. It felt warm and safe, in a way these gatherings never had when Nathan controlled the tone. I saw a flyer at the clinic about a local infertility support group looking for volunteers with medical backgrounds. I called the coordinator and explained I was a fertility nurse who'd been through IVF and lost myself. She sounded excited. The group met in a church basement, about 15 people sitting in a circle, sharing their struggles. I introduced myself, shared part of my story about Nathan's cruelty and how I'd survived years of insensitive comments. Several people nodded, like they understood exactly what I meant. After the meeting, 3 women came up to me privately and described similar situations with family members or friends. I gave them practical advice about setting boundaries and finding supportive communities. Helping others who were walking the same painful path I'd walked felt purposeful. The coordinator asked if I'd be willing to lead a session about handling insensitive comments from loved ones, and I agreed. Turning my pain into something that could support other people made the years of hurt feel less pointless. My husband and I sat in our living room one evening, talking about what we actually wanted our life to look like. He asked if I was still set on having biological children, or if we could consider other options. I admitted the desperation around fertility treatments had started to lift once Nathan's behavior was exposed, and I stopped feeling like I had something to prove. We talked about being more involved with Beth's kids as the cool aunt and uncle who took them on adventures. My husband mentioned fostering or adoption as possibilities if we decided we wanted children in our home. I said I needed time to figure out what I wanted versus what I thought I was supposed to want. He agreed. No rush. The pressure that had weighed on us for years felt lighter. We started making plans for a vacation. Just the 2 of us, something we hadn't done in forever because all our money went to treatments. We talked about hobbies we'd abandoned and friends we'd stopped seeing. Family started meaning something different to us, something bigger than just biology. Beth called me a year after her divorce was finalized. "I started dating someone I met at work," she said, her voice nervous. I told her she deserved to feel attractive and valued. She admitted the guy was nice, made her laugh, didn't pressure her about anything. They'd been on 4 dates, and he'd met the kids briefly. She said it felt strange being pursued by someone who actually listened when she talked and respected her boundaries. I asked if she was happy, and she said yes, genuinely happy in a way she couldn't remember being with Nathan. Over the next few months, Beth's confidence grew. She started taking art classes she'd always wanted to try. She redecorated her apartment in colors she liked instead of the neutral tones Nathan had insisted on. She told me once that she was grateful the affair got exposed when it did, because she could have wasted another decade with Nathan. Watching her build an independent life and discover interests Nathan had dismissed made me realize how much he'd controlled her, too. Nathan tried reaching out to his siblings and cousins through texts and social media. Most people responded politely, but kept him at a distance. His brother agreed to meet him for coffee once, but told me later it was awkward and sad. Nathan wanted to talk about rebuilding relationships, but couldn't seem to understand why people didn't trust him anymore. At a cousin's wedding, Nathan showed up uninvited and tried to join family conversations. People were civil, but nobody sought him out or included him in photos. I watched him standing alone near the bar, looking diminished. His reputation in the family was permanently damaged. The community knew about the affair and the financial deception because Beth's friends had talked and word spread. Nathan had to accept that consequences for his actions included lost relationships and trust that might never be fully rebuilt. He'd made choices, and now he lived with the results. I scheduled a final session with Annabelle to process how everything had resolved. She asked how I felt about Nathan's exposure and downfall. I admitted I felt vindicated, but also sad for Beth and the kids who didn't deserve the pain. Annabelle said both feelings could exist together. She asked if I thought my actions were revenge or self-protection. I said I'd spent years being hurt by Nathan, and when I had information that could free Beth from lies, I found a way to help her discover it without violating my professional ethics. Annabelle nodded. That, she said, was justified self-protection, not petty revenge. We talked about my infertility journey and how I'd stopped letting it define my worth. She pointed out how much stronger I seemed compared to our first session months ago. I told her I'd learned to set boundaries and stop tolerating poor treatment. Annabelle said she was proud of my growth. I left her office feeling more at peace with everything, both the infertility and the situation with Nathan. I felt stronger in my sense of self-worth. The next family gathering was a birthday party for one of Nathan's nieces. I actually looked forward to going, instead of dreading it for weeks beforehand. Without Nathan there making cruel comments, I could relax and enjoy conversations with relatives. My husband's aunt, who used to make comments about us being selfish, approached me and apologized for her past remarks. She said learning about Nathan's cruelty made her realize how hurtful, thoughtless comments could be. Nathan's cousin pulled me aside and thanked me for my grace in handling everything. I should have spoken up years ago, she admitted, but I convinced myself it wasn't my business. Several family members said similar things throughout the party. The atmosphere was genuinely warm and comfortable. I didn't have to brace myself for attacks or prepare defensive responses. I could just be present and enjoy time with people who actually cared about me. Beth and I met for coffee every few weeks, and our relationship shifted into real friendship. We talked about our therapy sessions, dating experiences, and work frustrations like actual friends, instead of relatives forced together by marriage. She told me she understood now how much Nathan had isolated her from having her own identity. I shared my struggles with accepting my infertility journey might not end with a biological child. We supported each other through ongoing challenges and celebrated small victories. When Beth got her promotion, I took her out for dinner. When I led my first support group session, she texted me encouragement. The shared experience of surviving Nathan's manipulation created a bond between us that felt solid and real. She became someone I genuinely wanted in my life, not just someone I had to tolerate at family events. We made plans together and checked in on each other and showed up when it mattered. We grew stronger together through everything that happened with Nathan. My husband stopped trying to call his brother after the third attempt went to voicemail. He sat at our kitchen table one morning and told me he was done hoping Nathan would become someone different. He said he was proud of how I handled everything and grateful the family finally understood what Nathan really was. We talked about how the whole situation brought us closer instead of tearing us apart, like Nathan probably hoped. My husband said he'd rather have a brother who was gone than one who treated me like Nathan did. We started planning actual futures instead of just surviving each family gathering. Our marriage felt solid in a way it hadn't before because we'd faced something terrible together and came out okay. Nathan finished his therapy sessions and parenting classes about 8 months after the divorce. Beth told me he seemed different in the supervised visits, less defensive and more willing to listen. She said his therapist reported he was doing real work instead of just showing up to check boxes. Then a letter arrived at our house with Nathan's handwriting on the envelope. I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. The letter was 3 pages long and took full responsibility for everything he'd said and done to me over the years. He wrote that he'd been projecting his own fears and failures onto me because it was easier than facing his own problems. He admitted practicing cruel comments to make them sound natural. He said he knew exactly how much pain he was causing and did it anyway because making me feel small made him feel bigger. He apologized for the miscarriage comments specifically, saying those were unforgivable, and he understood if I never wanted to see him again. There were no excuses about stress or midlife crisis or anything else, just acknowledgement that he'd been deliberately cruel to someone who didn't deserve it. I read the letter twice and then put it in a drawer. I didn't respond because I didn't owe him anything, but something inside me relaxed, knowing he finally understood what he'd done. Savannah's high school graduation was on a sunny Saturday in June. The ceremony was held outside on the football field. Beth sat with her 3 younger kids in the family section while Nathan sat alone near the back, separated by his own choices. When Savannah walked across the stage to give her speech as class president, Beth grabbed my hand and squeezed. Savannah talked about learning to trust yourself when the people you counted on let you down. She said sometimes the hardest lesson was realizing someone you loved wasn't who you thought they were, and that strength came from choosing truth over comfortable lies. She never mentioned Nathan by name, but everyone who knew their story understood exactly what she meant. Her voice stayed steady through the whole speech, and the audience gave her a standing ovation. Beth cried watching her daughter up there, so proud and strong despite everything she'd been through. Nathan left right after the ceremony ended without trying to talk to anyone. I saw him walking to his car alone, while families celebrated together on the field. Consequences looked like that sometimes, sitting by yourself while everyone else had each other. My husband and I had the adoption conversation on a random Tuesday night while doing dishes. He asked if I was ready to try a different path to having a family, and I realized I was. The desperate hope that came with each IVF cycle had been replaced with something calmer and more certain. We weren't broken or less than because we couldn't have biological children. We were just people who would build our family differently than we'd originally planned. I called the adoption agency the next morning and requested an application packet. Filling out the forms felt different from the medical paperwork I'd completed so many times before. These forms asked about our home and our values and what kind of parents we wanted to be. They asked what we could offer a child instead of what was wrong with my body. We completed background checks and home visits and reference letters. The social worker who interviewed us said we'd make excellent parents, and she could tell we'd thought seriously about what adoption meant. Starting the process felt like opening a door I hadn't known was there, walking into possibilities instead of staying stuck in what hadn't worked. Beth called me at work to share that she'd gotten the promotion she'd applied for months earlier. The position came with a significant raise, her own office, and a team of people reporting to her. She said Nathan had always told her she wasn't ready for management, that she should focus on the kids instead of chasing career advancement. She'd believed him for years, stopped applying for positions she was qualified for. Now she was thriving in exactly the kind of role he'd convinced her she couldn't handle. Her confidence had grown steadily since the divorce, each accomplishment proving she never needed him to succeed. She bought a new car with her first bigger paycheck, something reliable and nice that she picked out herself. She redecorated her apartment in colors she actually liked. She joined a gym and started taking weekend trips with the kids, and made plans that didn't require anyone's approval. Her independence was the best possible response to someone who tried to make her feel small and incapable. Nathan's younger 3 children started warming up to him again through the supervised visits. Beth told me he actually listened when they talked now instead of checking his phone or planning what to say next. He asked about their interests and remembered details from previous conversations. He helped with homework without getting impatient and played games they wanted to play instead of directing everything. The kids still preferred living with Beth, and the visits were carefully structured, but they stopped crying before seeing him. The relationship would never be what it was before everything fell apart, but it was becoming something more honest. Nathan was learning to be a better father because he had no other choice. The consequences of his old behavior had been too severe to ignore. Therapy and requirements and losing everything had forced him to actually change instead of just promising to. The call from the adoption agency came on a Wednesday afternoon while I was at work. Our adoption coordinator said the birth mother had gone into labor and asked if we could get to the hospital within the hour. My husband picked me up, and we drove there in a blur of excitement and terror. We'd met with her twice before, a young woman who chose us from several couples because she liked that we'd struggled to have children and would appreciate the gift she was giving. The nurses directed us to a waiting room near the delivery area. We sat there holding hands and barely breathing as minutes stretched into hours. Finally, the coordinator came to get us and led us down the hall. The birth mother wanted us in the room for the delivery. I stood next to the bed, feeling overwhelmed and grateful as she pushed and the medical team encouraged her. Then the baby was there, tiny, red, crying. A nurse placed her in my arms. Our daughter, perfect, wanted, loved. I looked at her face and felt something shift in my chest. All the years of negative pregnancy tests and failed treatments and cruel comments from Nathan, suddenly leading to this exact moment. This exact child who was always meant to be ours. My husband was crying, and I was crying, and the birth mother was crying as she watched us meet our daughter for the first time. The nurse took the baby to clean her up, and we thanked the birth mother over and over. She smiled and said she was glad her daughter would have parents who wanted her so much. We stayed at the hospital for 2 days, doing paperwork and learning how to care for our newborn. Every time I looked at her sleeping in the bassinet, I felt grateful for the path that brought us here, even the painful parts that taught us what really mattered. Our daughter's first birthday party filled our backyard with family and friends on a sunny Saturday afternoon. Beth and her 4 kids arrived early to help set up decorations. Nathan's parents came with presents and genuine smiles, spending the afternoon playing with their grandchildren, including our daughter, who they'd embraced completely. My parents drove in from 2 hours away, and my mom cried happy tears watching her granddaughter smash cake into her face. I stood near the fence, watching everyone gather around the high chair for photos. Beth caught my eye from across the yard, and we shared a smile that held years of understanding. We'd both survived Nathan's cruelty and manipulation. We'd both built lives full of love and purpose and people who truly valued us. My daughter squealed with delight as my husband wiped frosting from her hair. This was the family Nathan said I'd never have. The motherhood he claimed my body was too smart to allow. His cruelty no longer had any power over me because I'd created something real and beautiful that had nothing to do with him. Beth walked over and put her arm around my shoulders as we watched the kids play together in the grass. She told me she was proud of both of us for refusing to let Nathan's poison define our futures. I agreed, and I truly meant it. We'd both thrived in ways Nathan never could have given us, building lives based on honesty and strength instead of lies and control. Our daughters would grow up knowing their mothers survived hard things and came out stronger. It was a tough journey, one filled with so much pain, but ultimately it led to so much unexpected beauty and strength. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to choose between peace and justice when dealing with toxic family? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to know.